Welcome to Bards and Cards. This episode features one of the most renowned American Southern writers of the 20th century, Eudora Welty. Born in 1909 in Jackson, Mississippi, Eudora Welty grew up in a close-knit and loving family. She attended public school in Jackson and graduated from Central High School in 1925. She attended college in Mississippi and Wisconsin and then went on to graduate school at the Columbia University School of Business. Her studies were cut short, however, when she returned to Mississippi in 1931 after the death of her father. Her work in radio and journalism required her to travel around Mississippi and the South, and during her travels she took many photographs, some of which were exhibited in New York in 1936 and 37. Although her photographs were not published during that time, her first short story was Death of a Traveling Salesman. It appeared in Manuscript Literary Magazine in 1936. Her first book was published 5 years later, a collection of short stories titled A Curtain of Green. 17 more books followed through the years, including more short story collections as well as longer works. Notably, in 1973, her book The Optimist's Daughter won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and in 1983, the collected stories of Eudora Welty won the National Book Award for Fiction. She also published several books of her photographs, and her autobiography, One Writer's Beginnings, published in 1984 by Harvard University Press, was a nationwide bestseller. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the French Legion of Honor, served as the subject of a BBC documentary, and was chosen as the first living writer to be published in the Library of America series. Eudora Welty died on the 23rd of July, 2001, in Jackson, Mississippi, her lifelong home, and where she is buried. To begin, I would like to read from the preface to the collected stories of Eudora Welty. And this is what she says. The present collection holds all my published stories, those in A Curtain of Green and the 3 volumes that followed, and 2 that appear here for the first time in book form. In general, my stories, as they've come along, have reflected their own present time, beginning with the depression in which I began. They came out of my response to it. These 2, written in the changing 60s, reflect the unease, the ambiguities, the sickness and desperation of those days in Mississippi. If they have any special virtue in this respect, it would lie in the fact that they, like the others, are stories written from within. They come from living here. They were part of living here, of my long familiarity with the thoughts and feelings of those around me, in their many shadings and variations and contradictions. I have been told, both in approval and in accusation, that I seem to love all my characters. What I do in writing of any character is to try to enter the mind, heart, and skin of a human being who is not myself. Whether this happens to be a man or a woman, old or young, with skin black or white, the primary challenge lies in making the jump itself. It is the act of a writer's imagination that I set most high. Eudora Welty, Jackson, Mississippi, May 1980. And I have chosen to read the opening section of her short story entitled Asphodel. It was a cloudless day, a round hill where the warm winds blew. It was noon, and without a shadow, the line of columns rose in perfect erectness from the green vines. There was a quiver of bird song. A little company of 3 women stood fixed on the slope before the ruin, holding wicker baskets between them. They were not young. There were identical looks of fresh morning on their faces. The wind blew down from the columns, and the white dimity fluttered about their elbows. "Look," Asphodel. It was a golden ruin, 6 Doric columns, with the entablature unbroken over the first 2, full facing the approach. The sky was pure, transparent, and round like a shell over this hill. The 3 women drew nearer, in postures that were still from ministrations, and that came from a morning procession. "This is Asphodel," they repeated, looking modestly upward to the frieze of maidens that was saturated with sunlight and seemed to fill with color, and before which the branch of a leafy tree was trembling. "If there's one place in the solid world where Miss Sabina would never look for us, it's Asphodel," they said. "She forbade it," they said virtuously. "She would never tolerate us to come to Mr. Don McInnes's Asphodel, or to even say his name. Her funeral was yesterday, and we've cried our eyes dry," said one of the 3. "And as for saying Mr. Don's name out loud, of course he is dead too." And they looked from one to the other, Cora, Phoebe, and Irene, all old maids, in hanging summer cottons, carrying picnic baskets. The way was so narrow they had come in a buggy and then walked. There was not a shadow. It was high noon. A honey locust bent over their heads, sounding with the bees that kept at its bee-like flowers. "This is the kind of day I could just eat," cried Cora ardently. They were another step forward. A little stream spread from rock to rock and over the approach. Then their shoes were off, and their narrow maiden feet hung trembling in the rippling waters. The wind had shaken loose their gray and scanty hair. They smiled at one another. "I used to be scared of little glades," said Phoebe. "I used to think something wild would come and carry me off." Then they were laughing freely all at once, drying their feet on the other side of the stream. The mockingbirds seemed to imitate flutes in the midday air. The horse they had unhitched champed on the hill, always visible, an old horse that seemed about to run, his mane fluttering in the light and his tail flaunted like a decoration he had only just put on. Then the baskets were opened, the cloth was spread, the aromatic ham and chicken, spices and jellies, fresh breads and a cake, peaches, bananas, figs, pomegranates, grapes, and a thin dark bottle of blackberry cordial. "There's one basket left in the buggy," said Irene, always the last one to yield. "I like to have a little something saved back." The women reclined before the food, beside the warm and weighty pedestal. Above them the 6 columns seemed to be filled with the inhalations of summer, and to be suspended in the resting of noon. That's where I will leave the story, and we will move on to see what Ms. Welty has to say through the cards. Before I move on with this reading, I would like to say that this one is especially significant for me. I spent most of my life in the American South and many, many, many years in the greater Jackson, Mississippi area. Although I cannot say that I have ever met Miss Eudora, I've certainly been in her presence several times, particularly when I worked for public television for the state of Mississippi. She was a remarkable person and so very, very beloved. And I thought The appropriate cards to use for a message from her is the Southern Gothic Oracle by Stacy Williams Eng. So let's see. Oh, Ms. Eudora, with your gracious Southern energy, what message would you give us today? Oh, it's falling out. Let's see. The Candlelight Spirit. Okay, this is one of the haunts. Virtue and oppression. I'm going to look up what the designer of this deck said. I'm not as familiar with oracles immediately as I am with tarot cards. So let me find, is there a number? All right, 23. The Candlelight Spirit is based on a well-known ghost story from the Bullock Hall Plantation in Roswell, Georgia. The mansion was built in the 1830s by James Stephen Bullock, and the family cotton business relied on slave labor to exist. The mansion is mentioned in several books and websites about paranormal activity because of the legend of the girl who drowned in the well. It seems that one of the enslaved children on the plantation, a girl of about 14, was drawing water from the well behind the house when she fell in and drowned. In life, she had been a domestic servant, meaning that she worked inside the house, mostly helping with kitchen and cleaning duties. According to oral history, one of her jobs was to light and extinguish the candles. The girl's apparition has been seen in the house, and since her death, another strange phenomenon has occurred for many years. The candles throughout the house will not stay lit for any length of time. Sometimes the entire house will light up, although no one is inside. The Candlelight Spirit is pictured here beside a stump, not a well, in order to focus on how her life was so brutally cut short. Not only was she held as property since birth, she never had the opportunity to reach adulthood or taste freedom. If you draw this card, take a moment to ponder and pray for those among us who still suffer from oppression. Ask yourself, what am I doing to make a better future? Wow. That is definitely something to think about, to consider. And I thank you, Ms. Eudora, for bringing this to our attention. The whole slavery issue is one that the American South still struggles with. Actually, our whole country struggles with, as we see how systemic racism has continued some of the oppression. Well, so the message is to focus on how we can make this a better world. That is quite a noble thing to do, and an encouraging thing from Miss Welty, that she has faith that we can do it. So thank you for watching Bards and Cards. I appreciate it, and I will see you again with another wonderful writer. Bye-bye.